When my stepmother's hand cracked across my face, the orchestra on the other side of the curtain didn't stop, but my world did. She smoothed her designer gown, thinking she had just secured control over my grandfather's $50 million legacy. She believed no one saw the hit and that the night belonged to her. But then the host stepped up to the microphone, looked straight past her smiling face, and called my name. My name is Lauren Keaton, and I am 32 years old. At that specific moment, I was standing in the cramped, dust-choked shadows behind the velvet curtains of the Hayes Harbor Convention Hall in Portland, Oregon. My dress was a simple navy sheath I had bought off the rack at a department store 2 seasons ago, and it felt painfully inadequate. It felt like armor made of tissue paper. Out there, beyond the heavy fabric dividers, the air was conditioned to a crisp 68 degrees and smelled of expensive cologne and anticipation. Back here, it smelled of heated electronics, old plywood, and my own cold sweat. The convention hall was packed. I could feel the vibration of 600 people through the floorboards. They were the elite of the Pacific Northwest, the philanthropists, the city council members, the people who claimed to care about the future of our city. They were all waiting for one number, $50 million. That was the donation my grandfather, Walter Hayes, was pledging to the community tonight. It was his life's work liquidated into a check. It was supposed to build libraries, fund veteran support groups, and clean up the harbor. But I was holding the truth in my right hand. It was a small, silver flash drive, no bigger than a pack of gum. It was warm because I had been squeezing it so hard the edges were digging into my palm. The data inside this drive did not tell a story of generosity. It told a story of theft. It detailed shell companies, forged signatures, and a slow, parasitic drain on my grandfather's accounts that had been happening for over 5 years. Ladies and gentlemen, the voice of the master of ceremonies, Maya Rhodes, boomed through the massive speakers, sounding distorted and godlike from my position backstage. Tonight is about legacy. It is about the enduring promise of the Hayes family. Maya was good. She was selling the fantasy. I had to go out there. I had to walk past the stage manager who was glaring at his clipboard, walk up the stairs, and somehow get this drive to someone who would listen before the check was signed. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My military training, 10 years in Air Force logistics, was supposed to make me immune to panic. But this wasn't a supply chain crisis. This was personal. Then I smelled it. It was a cloying mixture of heavy floral perfume, Casablanca lilies, I think, and the sharp, acidic tang of expensive red wine. It was a scent that had haunted my teenage years and soured my 20s. "You look like a caterer who got lost," a voice whispered directly behind my left ear. I stiffened, my grip on the flash drive tightening until my knuckles turned white. I turned around slowly. Valerie Keaton stood there. My stepmother looked immaculate. She was wearing a shimmering silver gown that probably cost more than my car, the fabric catching the dim backstage blue safety lights like liquid mercury. Her blonde hair was coiffed into an architectural masterpiece, not a single strand out of place. She was 55, but her surgeons had frozen her face in a permanent expression of youthful, haughty surprise. Her eyes, however, were old. They were hard, flinty, and currently burning with a rage she was barely containing. "Go home, Lauren," Valerie said. Her voice was low, a hissed command. She took a step closer, invading my personal space. "You are not going to ruin this night. You are not going to embarrass your father." "I'm not the one embarrassing him," I said, my voice shaking slightly despite my best effort to keep it steady. "Does Dad even know, Valerie? Does he know about the accounts in the Caymans? Does he know you have been siphoning off the interest from the trust since Grandpa had his stroke?" Valerie's smile didn't waver, but the corners of her eyes tightened. It was a terrifying disconnect. "You have always had such a vivid imagination. It is the trauma, isn't it?" "That is what we tell people. Poor Lauren. The service broke her. She sees enemies where there is only family." "I have the ledgers," I said, raising my fist slightly to show the silver glint of the drive. I have the emails where you practice signing my name. I have everything." Valerie's gaze dropped to my hand. The mask of the perfect socialite slipped, just for a fraction of a second, revealing the desperate predator underneath. "Give me that," she demanded, abandoning the whisper. "No." "I said give it to me!" She lunged. It wasn't a graceful movement. It was frantic. Her manicured claws raked across my wrist. Trying to pry my fingers open, I pulled back, twisting my body away from her, using a basic defensive maneuver I hadn't used since basic training. "It is Grandpa's money," I hissed, stepping back. "It is $50 million for the city. Valerie, it is not your personal retirement fund. It is not a safety net for your gambling debts." "You ungrateful little brat," she spat. "I kept this family together. I managed the doctors. I managed the estate while you were off playing soldier in the desert. I deserve this." "You stole it." The word hung in the air between us, heavy and absolute. Valerie didn't scream. She didn't call for security. She reacted with a flash of physical violence that was so sudden, so practiced, it took my breath away. Her hand cracked across my face. It wasn't a theatrical slap. It was a heavy, open-palmed strike that connected with my cheekbone and ear with a wet, sickening thwack. The force of it sent my head whipping to the right. My vision blurred into streaks of blue light and darkness. I stumbled back, my heels catching on a taped-down cable. Valerie didn't stop. She shoved me, hard, with both hands against my chest. I flew backward and collided with a heavy fire-rated metal door. Bang! The sound of my spine hitting the steel reverberated through my skull. Louder than the applause from the audience out front. Pain exploded in my lower back and radiated up to my neck. The air left my lungs in a sharp gasp. I slid down the door slightly, trying to find my footing, trying to blink away the black spots dancing in my eyes. For a second, the only sound I could hear was the rush of blood in my ears and the high-pitched whine of feedback from a speaker somewhere above us. My cheek felt like it was on fire. I could taste copper in my mouth. I had bitten the inside of my cheek. This was not a parent disciplining a child. This was an assault. I was a 32-year-old woman, a veteran, a professional, and I was being beaten in the dark by a woman in a ball gown. "You will keep your mouth shut," Valerie hissed, leaning over me. Her face was inches from mine now. I could smell the wine on her breath, sour and strong. "You think anyone out there cares about your spreadsheets? You are nobody. Lauren, you are the sad, estranged daughter. I am the matriarch. I am the one they are cheering for." I clutched the flash drive to my chest, wheezing, trying to pull air back into my lungs. My eyes watered involuntarily from the sting on my face. To my right, movement caught my eye. A young stagehand, a boy maybe 20 years old with a headset around his neck, had come around a stack of speakers. He froze. His eyes went wide as he looked at me, slumped against the metal door, holding my face, and then at Valerie, who was looming over me like a vengeful spirit. Valerie saw him too. The transformation was instantaneous. It was almost impressive in its monstrosity. Her shoulders dropped. Her face softened into a mask of tragic concern. She reached out, not to hit me, but to grab my elbow gently. "Oh, Lauren, honey," she said, her voice pitching up loud enough for the stagehand to hear. "You are having another episode. Just breathe. Breathe for me. Did you forget to take your medication again?" I stared at her, horrified. She was rewriting reality in real time. I am fine," I choked out, slapping her hand away. "Don't touch me." Valerie looked at the stagehand and gave him a sad, conspiratorial shake of her head. "She gets confused," she mouthed to him. "The lights, the crowd, it is too much for her." The stagehand looked uncertain, shifting his weight. He didn't intervene. He just looked down at his clipboard and scurried away. He didn't want to get involved with the rich people's drama. "See," Valerie whispered, turning back to me, her grip on my arm tightening until her nails dug into my skin. "Nobody believes you. Nobody sees you. Now, you are going to stand up. You are going to walk out that back exit, and you are going to disappear. If you try to go on that stage, if you try to show anyone that drive, I will bury you. I will have you committed. I will make sure you lose that tiny little apartment and that pathetic job at the nonprofit. I will leave you with nothing." Out on the stage, the music swelled. A drum roll started. It was the cue. I could hear the producer's voice crackle over the intercom system nearby. "Okay, Maya, we are running 2 minutes behind. Wrap the intro. Get the family out there. Let's go." Valerie straightened up. She smoothed the front of her silver dress. She checked her reflection in the glass of a fire extinguisher case, patting a stray hair back into place. She looked perfect. She looked like the benevolent savior of the city. She looked like the woman who was about to control a $50 million empire. "Stay here," she commanded, giving me one last look of pure disdain. "And wipe your face. You look like a mess." She turned and walked toward the curtain, her hips swaying, her smile already fixed in place for the cameras. She was ready to accept the applause. She was ready to take the oversized check and the glory. My cheek throbbed in time with the drum roll. I felt sick. I felt small. I pushed myself off the metal door, my legs shaking. I looked at the flash drive in my hand. What was the point? She was right. She controlled the narrative. She had the microphone. She had the audience. I was just the damaged stepdaughter in the shadows. And now, Maya Rhodes's voice rang out, clear and commanding. The moment we have all been waiting for. I watched Valerie pause just behind the curtain. She took a deep breath, preparing her entrance. She was expecting her name. She had written the press release herself. Mrs. Valerie Keaton, trustee of the Hayes estate. Mr. Hayes was very specific about his wishes for tonight. Maya continued. There was a pause, a strange, unscripted silence that lasted half a second too long. Valerie frowned slightly. That wasn't in the teleprompter. I looked toward the stage. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see Maya Rhodes standing at the podium. She wasn't looking at the camera. She wasn't looking at the audience. She turned her head. She looked past the lights, past the curtain, into the darkness of the wings. She looked right at where I was standing. Valerie took a step forward. Assuming the cue was coming, she raised her hand to wave. "Please welcome," Maya said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming serious, almost solemn. "The woman Walter Hayes personally designated as the sole executor of this donation." Valerie's smile widened. She stepped into the light. "Please welcome," Maya shouted, "Lauren Keaton." The name hit the air like a gunshot. Valerie froze mid-step. One foot was on the stage, one foot off. The smile didn't just slide off her face, it shattered. Her jaw went slack. Her eyes darted from the audience to Maya, and then back to the darkness where I stood. For a moment, the entire convention hall was silent. The applause that had started to ripple for Valerie died down in confusion. People were murmuring, "Lauren? Who is Lauren?" I stood there, stunned, my hands still clutching the flash drive, my face burning where she had slapped me. I looked at Valerie's back. I saw the tension in her spine, the sudden, rigid terror of a woman who realizes the ground has just opened up beneath her feet. Why did she call my name? I hadn't given Maya the drive yet. I hadn't shown anyone the proof. I was supposed to be the crazy one, the unstable one, the one erased from the picture. Grandpa was in the hospital. Valerie had the power of attorney. Or so she thought. Maya didn't move. She kept her hand extended toward the wings, waiting. She wasn't inviting Valerie. She was inviting me. The spotlight swung around, searching the darkness of the stage-left entrance, the bright beam cutting through the dust, blinding Valerie as it swept past her and landed squarely on me. I blinked in the harsh white glare. I was exposed. My simple blue dress, my messy hair, the red welt forming on my cheek. Valerie turned around slowly, her face pale under the stage makeup. She looked at me, and for the first time in 20 years, she didn't look at me with contempt. She looked at me with fear. $50 million was on the table, and somehow, against all the odds, against all the lies, The microphone was waiting for me. To understand why a 32-year-old woman would stand trembling behind a curtain with a flash drive in her hand, you have to understand that the theft did not begin with $50 million. It began with a much smaller robbery. Nearly 18 years ago, it began with the theft of a home. My mother died of heart failure when I was 14. She was a quiet woman who liked soil under her fingernails and books with cracked spines. When she passed, she left behind a small, drafty house in the suburbs, a garden full of stubborn hydrangeas, and a husband who did not know how to be alone. My father, Richard Keaton, was a man who needed an audience to feel like he existed, without my mother to applaud his small victories or soothe his ego. He collapsed inward. Within 6 months, the silence in our hallway was replaced by the ringing of debt collection calls. That was the vacuum Valerie walked into. She appeared exactly 1 year after the funeral. I remember the first time she came to dinner. She was working in something vague called public relations and event management, which I eventually learned meant she was an expert at wrapping empty boxes in expensive paper. She wore a cream-colored suit that looked terrified of our spaghetti sauce. Valerie did not look at my father with love. She looked at him like a fixer-upper property with good bones, but her real target was seated at the head of the table. My grandfather, Walter Hayes, had driven over in his 10-year-old pickup truck. He was wearing a flannel shirt, eating his pasta with the efficiency of a man who had spent 40 years building Hayes Marine Supply from a dockside shack into an empire. He was worth millions, but he still bought his coffee at the gas station. Valerie spent the entire dinner ignoring me and my father. Her laser focus was on Walter. She used words like legacy, community impact, and foundational optics. She spoke a language my grandfather didn't speak, but she made it sound like a translation of his soul. She told him that a man of his stature shouldn't just help people, he should leave a mark. I sat there, invisible, gripping my fork until my knuckles turned white. I was 14, but I had the animal instinct of a child who knows when a predator has entered the den. After dinner, while my father was eagerly pouring her another glass of wine in the living room, Valerie found me in the kitchen loading the dishwasher. The mask of the charming guest dropped instantly. Her face went slack and bored. She leaned against the counter, examining her manicure as if looking for a chip. "You don't need to try so hard to look pathetic. Lauren," she said. Her voice was light, conversational, like she was commenting on the weather. I froze, a dirty plate in my hand. "What?" She turned her head, her eyes sweeping over my oversized t-shirt and messy ponytail. "The grieving daughter act, it is cute, but let me give you some advice. You do not need to try to impress him. In Walter's eyes, you are just a child riding on his coattails. You are a biological obligation, nothing more." I didn't know how to respond. No adult had ever spoken to me with such casual cruelty. "He loves me," I whispered, my voice cracking. Valerie smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "He loves his money, sweetie, and he loves the idea of family. Don't confuse the two." She was wrong, of course, but she was loud, and she was persistent, and my father was weak. They were married 4 months later. The small house with the hydrangeas was sold. We moved into a penthouse apartment downtown that smelled of fresh paint and ambition. My father called it a fresh start. I called it the stage. Suddenly, our lives were no longer about living. They were about performing. Everything had to be camera-ready. Valerie began the process of refining me. It started with my clothes. My comfortable jeans and band t-shirts were thrown into donation bags, replaced by stiff, pastel dresses that made me feel like a doll in shrink wrap. Then it was my speech. I was told not to mumble, not to talk about my mother, not to bring up depressing topics when guests were over. By the time I was 17, she was trying to curate my future. She filled the dining room table with brochures for liberal arts colleges that were famous for their alumni networks rather than their academics. She talked about sororities, debutante balls, and degrees in communications. She wanted an accessory, a daughter she could trot out at luncheons to prove she was a benevolent stepmother. "I want to study engineering." I told her one night over a dinner of arugula and silence. Or logistics. Valerie laughed, a sharp, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. Logistics? Like a truck driver? Don't be absurd. Lauren, you are a Keaton now. You need to think about the brand. I looked at my father, waiting for him to defend me. He just swirled his scotch and stared at the tablecloth. Listen to Valerie, honey. She knows what looks best. That was the night I realized I was entirely alone in that house. But I still had the weekends. Sunday mornings were my sanctuary. I would sneak out and meet Grandpa Walter at the marina. We would walk along the docks, checking the inventory of the fishing boats, smelling the salt and the diesel. He didn't care about brands. He cared about things that worked. You have got a head for numbers, kid, he told me once, watching me calculate the fuel efficiency of a trawler in my head. Don't let anyone fill it with fluff. Valerie says I should go to finishing school, I muttered, kicking a pylon. Walter snorted. Valerie thinks the world is built on handshakes and cocktails. It is not. It is built on supply chains and hard work. Listen to me, Lauren. The only gift I ever want to give you is independence. If you have to rely on someone else to feed you, you have to eat what they give you, even if it is poison. I took that advice to heart. When I turned 18, I didn't apply to the finishing schools. I went down to the recruitment center without telling a soul. I took the ASVAB test, scored in the top percentile, and signed the papers. I chose the Air Force. I chose logistics. I wanted to be as far away from event management as humanly possible. When I broke the news, the explosion was nuclear. We were in the living room. Valerie was showing my father swatches for new curtains. I walked in and placed my enlistment papers on the coffee table. I leave for basic training in 3 months, I said. Valerie looked at the papers as if I had placed a dead rat on her velvet ottoman. Her face turned a mottled red. You did what? Do you have any idea how this looks? A Keaton? Enlisting like some desperate person with no options? It is honorable service, I said, standing straighter than I ever had in that house. It is dirty, she screamed, losing her composure. You are going to wear a uniform? You are going to grease gears? You are humiliating us. My father looked panic-stricken. Lauren, maybe we can undo this. I can call someone. It is done, Dad, I said. The argument raged for an hour, but it stopped the moment the doorbell rang. It was Grandpa Walter. He had stopped by to drop off some fresh salmon he had caught. As soon as Walter walked in, Valerie performed a miracle. The rage evaporated. She smoothed her hair, put a hand on my shoulder, and beamed at my grandfather. Walter, she exclaimed, we were just celebrating. Have you heard the news? Our brave Lauren is following in the family tradition of service. She has enlisted. My jaw dropped. I stared at her, unable to process the speed of the lie. She has? Walter looked at me, his eyes crinkling with pride. Is that true, kid? Yes, I managed to say, still watching Valerie. I want to be independent. That is my girl, Walter said, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. That is exactly right. Valerie squeezed my shoulder hard enough to bruise. She is so strong, she cooed, just like her mother was. We are so proud to support her. 2 days later, Walter asked me to meet him at the bank. We sat in a small office with oak paneling, and he signed a stack of papers. This isn't $50 million, he said, sliding a folder toward me. But it is enough. It is a trust fund. I put some shares of the company in there for you. It will mature over time. The dividends should give you a cushion. I looked at the numbers. It was substantial. More money than I had ever seen. Grandpa, I can't take this, I said. I am going into the service. I will have a salary. Take it, he commanded gently. This isn't for buying cars or clothes. This is your go-to-hell fund. If you are ever in a corner, if you are ever stuck, you use this to buy your way out. Never have to beg. Lauren, promise me. I promise. We didn't know that Valerie had followed us. She hadn't come into the office, but she had been in the lobby. When we walked out, She was standing by the brochures, pretending to read about low-interest mortgages. "All done?" she asked, her eyes darting to the folder in my hand. "Just some housekeeping," Walter said. But Valerie heard the words, "trust and fund," as if they were shouted through a megaphone. I saw the look in her eyes. It was a calculation, a shift. Until that moment, I had been an annoyance. Now, I was a ledger entry. I was an asset to be acquired. I left for basic training 2 months later. The distance should have saved me, but it only gave Valerie the space she needed to work. The letters I sent home were rarely answered. When I did get a response, it was always from Valerie, never my father. She wrote short, breezy notes about how busy they were, how well her parties were going, and how happy Dad was. I came home for Christmas leave after my first year. I walked into the apartment expecting to feel some sense of homecoming, but the locks had been changed. I had to wait in the hallway for 20 minutes until the housekeeper let me in. When I walked into the living room, I stopped cold. The mantel, which used to hold a mixture of photos, my mother, me as a baby, Dad and me fishing, had been purged. Now, it was a shrine to the new order. There was a massive portrait of Valerie and Richard in black tie. There were 3 photos of Tyler, my half-brother who had been born 3 years prior. Tyler playing piano. Tyler in a little suit. Tyler with Walter. I looked for my mother. I found her frame face down in a cardboard box shoved into the back of the coat closet, buried under a pile of Valerie's old yoga mats. My high school graduation photo was there too. I pulled them out, my hands shaking, and marched into the study where my father was watching television. "Why are these in the closet?" I asked, holding up the photos. My father flinched, looking away from the screen but not meeting my eyes. He looked older, softer around the middle. The sharp edges of his grief had been sanded down into a dull compliance. "Oh, Lauren," he sighed, looking tired. "Valerie is just redecorating. She wanted a more cohesive look for the living room. You know how she is about aesthetics." "Cohesive means erasing me?" I asked. "Erasing Mom?" "Nobody is erasing anyone," he mumbled. "Don't start a fight. Please, I just want a peaceful holiday." I sat down on the arm of the leather chair. "Dad, I need to ask you something. The trust fund Grandpa set up. I got a notification that the mailing address for the statements was changed to this apartment. I wanted them sent to my base." My father shifted uncomfortably. He took a long sip of his drink. "Well, yes, Valerie mentioned that. She thought it would be safer. You are moving around so much, living in barracks, papers get lost. Identity theft is a real problem these days. I can handle my own paperwork. Dad, I am an officer in the United States Air Force." "It is complicated, honey," he said, finally looking at me. His eyes were pleading. He was begging me not to make him choose, because we both knew he had already chosen. Valerie has a head for these things. She is helping me manage everything, the household, the investments, the future. It is just easier this way. We are a family. We share burdens. "The money isn't a burden," I said slowly, "and it is in my name." "It is all for the family in the end," he said, reciting a line that sounded like it had been programmed into him. "Don't worry about money. Just enjoy your leave." I looked at him, this man who used to carry me on his shoulders, who used to cry when he heard my mother's favorite song, and I realized he was gone. He hadn't died, but he had been hollowed out and filled with Valerie's voice. I went to sleep in the guest room that night because my old bedroom had been turned into a meditation space for Valerie. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of city traffic. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for affection anymore. I wasn't just the unloved stepdaughter. I was a target. Valerie didn't just want to be the queen of the household. She wanted to control the board completely. And the trust fund my grandfather had given me, my go-to-hell fund, was the only piece on the board she didn't own yet. I went back to base a week early. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that logistics and distance would keep me safe. I focused on my career, on shipping containers and supply routes, on the clean, brutal honesty of numbers. I thought if I stayed away, if I let them play their socialite games in Portland, I would be safe. I didn't know that while I was tracking cargo planes in the desert, Valerie was back home, sitting at my father's desk, practicing my signature over and over again on a piece of scratch paper until she got the loop of the L just right, for the next 10 years. My life was defined by the relentless, comforting geometry of logistics. I became a logistics readiness officer in the Air Force. While my stepmother was back in Portland arranging flowers and curating guest lists, I was standing on tarmac strips in the Middle East and Germany, tracking millions of dollars worth of assets. My job was not glamorous. I did not fly jets. I did not kick down doors. I managed the flow. I ensured that fuel, ammunition, medical supplies, and spare parts moved from point A to point B without disappearing into the ether. I learned to spot a discrepancy in a manifest from 50 yards away. I learned that if a number on a spreadsheet does not match the physical inventory, it is never just a mistake. It is always a story. It is negligence, or it is theft. I became fluent in the language of accountability. I learned that trust is a liability, and verification is the only currency that matters. And yet, the supreme irony of my life is that while I was guarding the United States government's assets with paranoid intensity, I left the back door to my own life wide open. During my first few years of service, I felt a profound sense of guilt about leaving my father. Even though he had chosen Valerie, he was still the man who had taught me to fish. I knew the mortgage on the penthouse was stretching him thin. Richard Keaton was a man on a mid-level manager's salary, trying to live a CEO's lifestyle to please a wife who thought budgets were for other people. So I sent money. It started as a few $100s a month, then 1,000, then more. I justified it to myself as paying my share. Even though I wasn't living there, I wanted to buy my father some breathing room. "You are a lifesaver, Lauren," Valerie would say when she called, her voice thick with gratitude that almost sounded genuine. "Your father was so worried about the bills this month. You are such a good daughter." She never asked for the money directly. She just painted vivid pictures of my father's stress, his high blood pressure, his sleepless nights. She played me like a violin. About 3 years into my service, right before I was deployed for a 6-month rotation, a thick envelope arrived at my base. It contained a stack of legal documents tagged with colorful sticky notes indicating where I should sign. There was a handwritten note from Valerie on cheerful yellow stationery. "Honey, Dad and I are just updating our estate planning and insurance. Since you are going to be overseas and hard to reach, we need a limited power of attorney, just so I can handle your mail, pay any bills that come to the house, and deal with the insurance companies if anything happens. It is just standard procedure. Stay safe. Love, V." I was 21 years old. I was exhausted from pre-deployment drills. I was sitting on my bunk, surrounded by gear I had to pack. I looked at the papers. They looked dense and boring. I saw the words, "General Durable Power of Attorney" at the top, but my eyes glossed over the paragraphs about banking transactions and beneficiary designations. I trusted my father, and by extension, I foolishly believed that Valerie, for all her cruelty, wouldn't commit a felony against a family member. I thought she just wanted to control the household, not rob me blind. I signed the papers. I got them notarized by a JAG officer who asked me if I understood what I was signing. "Yes," I told him. "It is just so my parents can handle my mail." That signature was the single most expensive mistake of my life. For the next few years, the theft was quiet. It was the death of 1,000 cuts. My grandfather, Walter, was getting older. His sharp mind was starting to dull around the edges, a slow fade that Valerie was quick to exploit. Every time I called him, he would sound confused about why I hadn't visited. I tried to set up a lunch for us, Ren, he would say, using his nickname for me. "But Valerie said you were on a training exercise. She said you couldn't be disturbed." "I wasn't on training. Grandpa," I would say, frustration rising in my throat. "I was free all weekend." "Oh." He would sound deflated. "Well, maybe next time. I wanted to talk to you about the business, about some shares I wanted to move over to your name." We can talk now, I would urge. No, no, he would sigh. Valerie says it is too complicated to do over the phone. She says the tax implications are tricky. She is setting up a meeting with the lawyers for us when you are back for good. She was running interference. She was the gatekeeper, ensuring that Walter's generosity never found its way to me without passing through her filter first. I finally made it home for a short leave when I was 26. I walked into the penthouse and felt like I had stepped into a magazine spread. The furniture was new. Italian leather, chrome, heavy marble tables. There was art on the walls that I knew my father couldn't afford. They had just come back from 2 weeks in Tuscany. My father looked smaller than ever, shrinking into the expensive cushions of his new sofa. "Business must be good," I said during dinner, gesturing to a crystal chandelier that hung over the table like a frozen explosion. "We are getting by," my father mumbled into his wine glass. "Oh, don't be modest, Richard," Valerie chimed in. She was wearing a diamond tennis bracelet I had never seen before. "Walter has been very generous. He understands that maintaining the family image is part of the company's reputation. We are all family. After all, what is his is ours." The phrase made my skin crawl. What is his is ours. Later that night, I went into the study to use the printer for my return flight boarding pass. My father's laptop was open on the desk. I didn't mean to snoop, but the email client was open, and the subject line caught my eye. Optimization strategy. Pre-donation liquidity. It was an email from Valerie to a man named Marcus Thorne. I didn't know the name, but a quick search on my phone revealed he was a financial consultant who had been sanctioned twice by the SEC for unethical practices. I read the email quickly, my heart rate picking up. "Marcus, Walter is getting slower. We need to optimize the liquid assets in the secondary accounts before he finalizes the structure for the big donation. If we move the funds into the joint family holding now, we can frame it as consolidation for efficiency. He won't check the transfer logs. He trusts me." My blood ran cold. She wasn't just spending money. She was actively moving it. She was preparing for the day Walter died or lost his capacity to object. I heard footsteps in the hallway. I quickly closed the email window and pulled up my boarding pass. When Valerie walked in, I was staring at the printer. "Everything okay?" she asked, her eyes darting to the computer screen. "Just printing my ticket," I said. My voice sounded calm, trained by years of briefing superior officers, but my hands were shaking. I wanted to confront her. I wanted to wake my father up and shake him, but I had to be on a plane in 6 hours. I was reporting to a new command in Germany. If I started a war tonight, I would be fighting it from 4,000 miles away. I needed more proof. I needed a plan. So I left. I told myself I would investigate from Germany. I told myself I would call Grandpa Walter's regular lawyer. But life in the military has a way of swallowing your intentions. I got caught up in a massive logistics overhaul for the European theater. Weeks turned into months. And while I was distracted, Valerie was working overtime. She used the power of attorney I had signed 5 years prior. It had technically expired, or at least it should have been scrutinized. But Valerie was charming, and she had been banking at that branch for years. She filed an extension, forging my signature on the request form. She told the bank manager that I was in a combat zone and couldn't be reached, playing the worried mother card to perfection. With that access, she didn't just manage my bills. She linked my accounts, including the trust fund Walter had set up for me, to the family ecosystem. She framed it as an investment strategy, pooling resources to get better interest rates. Then, the hammer dropped. Walter had a stroke. It was mild, physically. He recovered his speech and his movement within a few weeks, but mentally, it rattled him. It made him suddenly, terrifyingly aware of his mortality. He decided he didn't want to wait until he died to make his mark. He announced he was going to liquidate a massive portion of his estate, $50 million, and donate it to the Hayes Community Foundation immediately. Valerie stepped in as his primary aide during the recovery. She was there every day, bringing him soup, managing his calendar, and most importantly, managing his paperwork. She convinced him that for the donation to have the maximum impact, the family needed to present a united front. She told him that I wanted to be part of it. She told him that I had authorized her to pledge the interest from my trust fund to support the donation's administrative costs. Lauren wants to contribute, Walter, she must have told him. She is so proud of you. She wants her money to do good work alongside yours. And she signed my name to the consent forms. She wasn't just stealing the money. She was stealing my voice. She was using my name to build a monument to her own vanity. I was 2 months away from separating from the Air Force when I got the email. It wasn't from Valerie, and it wasn't from my father. It was an automated security notification from the institution managing my trust. Subject: Alert. Change of primary contact information. Dear Ms. Keaton, this email is to confirm that the primary contact email and phone number associated with your account have been updated to v.keaton@keatonpr Group. If you did not authorize this change, please contact us immediately. I sat at my desk in the hangar, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. The noise of a C-130 transport plane taking off outside vibrated through the walls, but I felt a profound, ringing silence. She had locked me out. She knew I was coming home soon, and she was closing the gates. She was trying to make sure that when the statements came, they went to her, not me. She was hiding the body of the crime. I didn't call the bank immediately. I didn't call Valerie. I realized that if I tipped my hand now, she would shred everything. She would burn the paper trail. I spent my last 2 weeks in the service gathering every scrap of digital evidence I could access remotely. I printed bank statements from years ago that I had saved on my personal drive. I found the original copy of the power of attorney. I began to build a file, treating my own family like a hostile supply chain that needed to be audited. I separated from the Air Force with an honorable discharge and a burning, cold rage in my chest. When I flew back to Portland, I didn't tell them I was coming. I took a cab from the airport to the penthouse. Valerie opened the door. She was wearing a silk robe, holding a cup of tea. When she saw me standing there with my duffel bag, her face went through a fascinating sequence of micro-expressions: shock, annoyance, panic, and then, finally, the mask slammed back into place. "Lauren!" she shrieked, throwing her arms wide. "Oh my God! Richard! Richard! Come quick! She is home!" She pulled me into a hug. She smelled of expensive lotion and deceit. "Why didn't you tell us?" she whispered into my ear, her voice tight. "We would have sent a car." "I wanted to surprise you," I said. Pulling back, I looked her dead in the eyes. "I wanted to see the look on your face." My father came rushing into the hallway, looking older and more tired than I remembered. He hugged me, crying real tears, oblivious to the tension radiating off his wife. "You are home for good?" he asked, patting my face. "Yes, Dad," I said. "I am done serving others. It is time to take care of my own business." Valerie was standing behind him, her hands gripping the belt of her robe. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was looking at me the way a bomb disposal technician looks at a ticking device. She knew I had received that email. She knew I hadn't called. "Well," Valerie said, her voice brittle, "we have so much to catch up on. The gala is coming up. Walter is going to be so happy you are here for the big night." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I said. I walked past her into the living room, my boots heavy on the marble floor. I was a civilian now, but the war had just followed me home, and unlike my father, I wasn't going to surrender just to keep the peace. The first thing I did upon becoming a civilian was buy my own freedom, 1 month of rent at a time. I found a studio apartment in the Pearl District. It was 600 square feet of exposed brick and drafty windows, and it cost me more than I wanted to spend. But the check I wrote for the deposit came from my own account. It was money I had earned sweating in flight suits and arguing with supply contractors in 90-degree heat. It was clean money. Valerie hated that apartment. She hated it not because it was small, but because she didn't have a key. "It is so rustic," she said when she came to visit once. standing in the middle of my living room like she was afraid of catching a disease from the IKEA rug. But I suppose it is good for you to have a little hideaway to decompress. We told everyone that Walter bought it for you. It just sounds better, don't you think? That he is taking care of his fragile granddaughter. I was standing in the kitchenette, making coffee. I set the mug down hard. I paid for this, Valerie, with my savings. Oh, details. She waved her hand, dismissing my decade of service as a clerical error. People like to think Walter is generous. Why deny them a good story? That was the moment I realized that my independence was a threat to her brand. If I was self-sufficient, I wasn't a dependent, and if I wasn't a dependent, she couldn't justify managing me. So, she simply rewrote the script for her friends. In Valerie's version of Portland society, I was the charity case, the broken soldier living in a pied-à-terre funded by the family estate. I got a job 3 weeks later. I didn't ask my father for contacts. I didn't use the Keaton name. I applied to the Northline Impact Fund, a mid-sized firm that analyzed the efficacy of nonprofit investments. They needed someone who understood supply chains, someone who could look at a charity's budget and tell if the money was actually buying mosquito nets or just paying for executive retreats. It was quiet, unglamorous work. I spent my days in a cubicle, surrounded by 2 monitors, tracking dollars through complex systems. It was exactly what I needed. But you cannot escape a $50 million gravity well, no matter how far you move your desk. Did you hear about the Hayes Gala? I froze. My hands hovered over my keyboard. 2 analysts were talking in the break room behind me. Yeah, Walter Hayes, the other one said. Shipping magnate. $50 million to the Community Foundation. That is huge. I heard the family is going to be there to accept the honor. Must be nice to be a Keaton right now. I heard his daughter-in-law is the one really pushing it, the first voice said. Valerie Keaton? She is on the board of everything these days. She is practically a saint. I stared at my spreadsheet. The numbers blurred. A saint. Valerie had managed to convince the professional philanthropists of this city that she was the architect of my grandfather's generosity. She wasn't just stealing the money. She was stealing the credit. She was wearing my grandfather's lifetime of hard labor like a stolen coat. I went home that night and made the mistake of opening Facebook. I rarely used it, but morbid curiosity is a powerful force. There it was, a photo posted 2 hours ago. It was a professional shot, clearly taken in the penthouse living room. My father was sitting in a wingback chair, looking distinguished but vague, like an actor who had forgotten his lines. Valerie was standing behind him, her hand possessively on his shoulder, looking radiant and predatory. My half-brother, Tyler, was leaning against the mantel, looking bored and wealthy. And there, sitting next to my father, was Grandpa Walter. He looked thinner than I had ever seen him. His smile looked forced, or maybe just confused. The caption read, "The Keaton family, united and ready, preparing for a $50 million decision that will change our future forever. So proud of the legacy we are building. Hayes Legacy Family, first gala ready." I read it twice. Change our future. Not the community's future, our future. And then I looked at the photo again. I looked for the gap where I should have been. There wasn't one. The composition was tight, complete. They hadn't just taken a photo without me. They had framed the shot to ensure no one would wonder where the rest of the family was. I had been edited out of existence. The comments section was a river of sycophancy. "You look stunning, Val. Such a beautiful family. Walter is so lucky to have you guiding him. Can't wait for the big night." I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was a text from Valerie. "Hi, honey. Hope the new job is going well. Quick favor. I need you to sign a release form for the foundation. Just standard media waiver stuff so we can use your name in the program if we need to. I sent it to your email. DocuSign it tonight, okay?" I switched to my email. There it was. Consent for likeness and representation. I clicked it open. It wasn't just a media waiver. Buried in the 3rd paragraph, in dense legalese, was a clause that granted the Keaton family representative the right to approve all public statements and financial disclosures regarding the Hayes Trust beneficiaries. If I signed this, I wasn't just letting them take my picture. I was giving Valerie the legal right to speak for me. I was handing her a muzzle and asking her to strap it on. I typed a reply. My thumbs felt heavy. I read it. I am not signing this. The response came 30 seconds later. The cheerfulness was gone. Don't be difficult, Lauren. Dad is already stressed. This is just paperwork. Do not make this about you. It is about me if it is my name, I typed back. I am not signing. I set the phone down. My heart was hammering. It was the first time in my adult life I had flatly refused her. I expected a phone call. I expected my father to call me, begging me to keep the peace. But the phone stayed silent. The retaliation didn't come over the phone line. It came on my newsfeed. 2 hours later, a notification popped up. Valerie had shared an article from a psychology journal. The headline was, "The Silent War: Understanding PTSD and Anger Issues in Returning Female Veterans." Her caption was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive destruction. Reading this and crying, it is so hard to watch someone you love struggle with their demons after coming home. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is forgive their outbursts and protect them from themselves. We love you, no matter how hard you push us away. Military Family Mental Health. Health awareness, unconditional. Love. She didn't tag me. She didn't have to. Everyone in her circle knew I had just come back from overseas. Everyone knew I was the only veteran in the family. Within 20 minutes, the messages started coming in from mutual acquaintances, people I hadn't spoken to in years, people who only knew me through Valerie's filter. "Hey Lauren, just saw Val's post. Sending you light and love. Hope you are getting the help you need. Lauren, if you need a quiet place to stay, let me know. My cousin had PTSD. I know it is rough." I sat on my cheap IKEA rug, staring at the screen, feeling the walls close in. She was brilliant, evil, but brilliant. She knew I couldn't defend myself without looking defensive. If I commented and said, "I am fine," she is lying. I would look like the angry, denial-ridden soldier she was describing. If I stayed silent, her narrative stood as the truth. She was painting a picture of me as unstable, volatile, and mentally compromised. Why? Because if I started asking questions about the money, she needed a reason for people to ignore me. She was vaccinating the public against my testimony. Don't listen to Lauren. She is having an episode. She is confused. She is off her meds. I didn't sleep that night. I paced my 600 square feet, feeling the cage tightening. I realized then that I couldn't just hide in my apartment and do my job. They weren't just going to leave me alone. They were actively building a cage for me, bar by bar, post by post. 3 days before the gala, a heavy cream envelope arrived in my mailbox. The calligraphy was exquisite. Inside was an invitation to the Walter Hayes $50 million Legacy Gala. Clipped to the RSVP card was a handwritten note on Valerie's personal stationery. Her handwriting was jagged, aggressive, despite the expensive pen. "Lauren, Dad is heartbroken. You have embarrassed us enough with your silence. This is your opportunity to fix things. Come to the gala. Stand with the family. Show people you are well. If you do not show up, you are proving everyone right about your condition. Do not test me. V." I looked at the invitation. It felt like a summons. My instinct was to burn it. My instinct was to stay home, lock the door, and let them have their parade. But then I thought about Grandpa Walter. I thought about the go-to-hell fund he had given me. I thought about him telling me that independence was the only gift that mattered. If I didn't go, Valerie won. If I didn't go, I was the crazy daughter hiding in the dark. I decided to go, but I wasn't going to fix things. I was going as a spy. I was going to walk into that convention hall, smile for the cameras, and watch every single handshake. I was going to see exactly how she was moving the pieces. I marked attending on the card, took a picture of it, and texted it to her without a word. The night before the gala, I was sitting at my kitchen table, reviewing the public tax filings of the Hayes Community Foundation. I was looking for cracks. I was looking for the connection between the foundation and Valerie. My phone buzzed. It was nearly 11 at night. The screen lit up the dark room. It was a text message from a number I didn't recognize. No area code, just a string of digital noise. You should see how they use your name. My stomach dropped. I stared at the words. A second bubble appeared. It was a link to a secure file hosting site. I hesitated. My cybersecurity training screamed at me. Phishing, malware, trap. But the message was too specific. How they use your name. I opened my laptop. I engaged the VPN. I opened a secure browser. I typed in the link from the phone manually. The file downloaded instantly. It was a PDF, a scanned document. I opened it. The first page was a standard contract header. Consulting agreement, subsidiary management. I scrolled down. It was an agreement between the Hayes Community Foundation and a private entity called the Keaton Legacy Initiative. I had never heard of the Keaton Legacy Initiative. I scrolled to the signature page. There were two signatures. One was Valerie Keaton. The other was Lauren Keaton. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. It was my signature, or rather, it was a clumsy, shaky tracing of my signature. The L was too looped. The R was too sharp. It looked like the signature on the power of attorney I had signed 10 years ago, but distorted. I looked at the date. It was dated 3 weeks ago. While I was sitting in my cubicle at Northline, I had apparently signed a document creating a shell company to manage the administrative fees of my grandfather's donation. I scrolled back up to the terms. The Keaton Legacy Initiative was entitled to 2% of the donation's principal annually for management and advisory services. 2% of $50 million, $1 million a year. Valerie wasn't just stealing a lump sum. She had built a pipeline. She had created a salary for herself that would last for decades, paid for by the charity, and she had framed me as her partner. If this came out, if the IRS looked at this, if the fraud squad looked at this, I wouldn't just be a victim. I would be a co-conspirator. My name was on the line. My social security number was listed in the appendix. She had set me up. She had made me the fail-safe. If she got caught, she could point to the signature and say, "Lauren wanted this. Lauren signed it. Lauren is the veteran who needed the money." I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the laptop washing over my face. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is hot. Anger is messy. What I felt was cold. I felt the ice-cold clarity of a soldier who finally sees the enemy's position on the map. I wasn't going to the gala to watch. I wasn't going to the gala to support the family. I picked up the flash drive from my desk drawer. I plugged it into the laptop. I dragged the PDF onto the drive. I was going to the gala to drop a bomb. I sat there in the blue glow of my laptop screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. The file name was innocuous. KLI Service Agreement Scan V4, PDF. But as I double-clicked it, I felt the same cold, metallic taste in my mouth that I used to get right before a convoy rolled out into hostile territory. The document opened. It was 20 pages of dense legal text, scanned at a slight angle, indicating it had been copied in a hurry. The header was bold and official. Service and Management Agreement between the Hayes Community Foundation and the Keaton Legacy Initiative. I scrolled past the definitions and the preamble. I was looking for the mechanics of the theft. I found them on page 4. The Keaton Legacy Initiative. The document read, shall serve as the exclusive administrative partner for the Hayes donation, entitled to an annual operating fee equivalent to 3% of the principal endowment's accrued interest, plus a fixed management stipend drawn from the Hayes Family Trust. I did the math in my head instantly. $50 million. Even at a conservative return rate, 3% of the interest was hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And the fixed stipend? That was just a salary for existing. But the real horror wasn't the math. It was the signature page. I scrolled to the bottom. There was Valerie's signature, a sharp, angular scrawl that took up half the line, and right next to it, On the line labeled, Trust Beneficiary, Co-Signatory, was my name. Lauren Keaton. I stared at it. I reached out and touched the screen. It was a forgery, but it was a sophisticated one. It looked like someone had taken my signature from an old birthday card or a high school permission slip and traced it. The loop on the L was slightly too wide, and the T was crossed with a hesitation that I never had. But to a banker? To a foundation auditor who didn't know me? It was perfect. I wasn't just a bystander, I was an accomplice, by forging my signature. Valerie had made it look like I had agreed to this arrangement. She had made it look like the Keaton Legacy Initiative was a joint venture between the loving stepmother and the grateful daughter. I kept scrolling. The appendix hit me like a physical blow. There was a photocopy of my Social Security card. There was a printout of my trust fund account number, the Go to Hell fund Grandpa Walter had given me, and there was a paragraph stating that Ms. Lauren Keaton hereby pledges the assets of her personal trust as collateral for the initial operating line of credit for the initiative. She wasn't just skimming the donation, she was using my safety net, the money meant to guarantee my independence, to fund the startup costs of her theft. I clicked on the next file in the folder. It was a cache of emails. These weren't just business emails. These were the blueprints of a conspiracy. The first one was dated 6 months ago. It was from Valerie to that financial advisor, Marcus Thorne. Subject: Narrative Control. Marcus, regarding the bank's hesitation to release the trust access without Lauren's physical presence. I have spoken to the branch manager. I explained that Lauren is currently undergoing treatment for post-service reintegration issues and is not lucid enough to handle complex financial decisions. I offered to provide a medical affidavit if necessary. Do we have a doctor on retainer who can sign off on a general assessment of PTSD-related cognitive decline? I stopped breathing. The air in my apartment felt suddenly thin. This was why. This was why she had been posting those articles on Facebook. This was why she had told everyone I was struggling. It wasn't just cruelty, it was a tactical strike. She needed to establish a legal precedent that I was mentally incompetent so that she could use the power of attorney to bypass the bank's security protocols. I clicked the next email. It was from Marcus Thorne to Valerie. Valerie, as long as you keep Lauren in the troubled veteran box, no one is going to question why you are signing for her. The banks are terrified of ADA lawsuits and bad PR. If you say you are helping a disabled family member, they will bend the rules. Just make sure she doesn't show up to any meetings looking sane. I felt a scream building in my chest, hot and jagged, but I swallowed it down. Screaming was what the troubled veteran would do. Screaming would prove them right. I stood up and walked to my kitchen. I needed space. I needed to think like a logistics officer, not a victim. I cleared off my small dining table. I went to my bag and pulled out my printer. I connected it to the laptop and hit print all. For the next hour, the only sound in the apartment was the rhythmic whir of the printer spitting out pages. I taped them to the wall above my kitchen counter. I used painter's tape so I wouldn't damage the paint. A ridiculous habit to maintain while my entire life was being dismantled. But discipline was the only thing holding me together. I started building a timeline. I used a red marker to circle dates. 2014. I signed the original power of attorney before deploying. 2016. The power of attorney expires. Technically. 2017. Valerie files a renewal with the bank, using a forged signature. 2019. Grandpa Walter has his first minor health scare. Valerie restricts his phone access for rest that same week. $200,000 is moved from his primary account to a holding company. 2023. I return home. I stepped back and looked at the wall. It was a map of predation. Every time I was deployed, every time I was out of range, she had made a move. Every time Grandpa got sick, she had consolidated power. I looked closer at the bank statements for my personal trust fund, the ones included in the leak. I scanned the line items. There was a withdrawal from 3 months ago, $5,000. The memo line read, Legal Consulting, L. Keaton Best Interest. I frowned. I hadn't hired a lawyer 3 months ago. I was still unpacking boxes in my new apartment. I looked at the recipient. It wasn't a law firm. It was a shell company called MK Consulting. I ran a quick search on my phone. It was a dead end. Just a registered agent address in Delaware. But the phrase haunted me. For Lauren's best interest. She was using my money to pay for the lawyers who were helping her steal my identity. She was making me pay for my own erasure. I grabbed my phone. I needed to talk to Grandpa Walter. I needed to know if he knew anything about the Keaton Legacy Initiative. I dialed his direct line, the one at the rehab center where he was staying during the week for physical therapy. It rang once, twice, then a click. Hayes residence line, nurse station. A cheerful voice answered. "Hi, this is Lauren Keaton," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I would like to speak to my grandfather, Walter Hayes." There was a pause, the sound of typing. "Oh, Ms. Keaton," the nurse said, her voice dropping a few degrees. "I am sorry. Mrs. Valerie Keaton has placed a strict no agitation protocol on his call list for the days leading up to the gala. She said family disputes are upsetting his blood pressure." "I am not a dispute," I said, my hand gripping the phone so tight the case creaked. "I am his granddaughter." "I understand," the nurse said, sounding rehearsed. "But Mrs. that Keaton has medical power of attorney. I cannot put the call through. She said if you need to speak with him, you can coordinate through her office." I hung up. She had cut the lines. She had isolated the target. I looked back at the wall of evidence. I had the contracts. I had the emails. I had the timeline. But I was just one person. I was the unstable daughter. If I walked into the police station right now, Valerie would have a lawyer there in 20 minutes claiming I had hacked her accounts and forged these emails myself. I needed verification. I needed a professional opinion that didn't come from inside my own head. I packed the printed documents back into a folder. I put the flash drive on a chain around my neck and tucked it under my shirt. I backed up the files to an encrypted cloud server and then copied them again to an external hard drive, which I taped to the underside of my refrigerator. Paranoid? Maybe. But in logistics, you learn that redundancy saves lives. I went to work the next morning with eyes that felt like they were filled with sand. I sat through 2 meetings about community garden grants, nodding at the right times, while my mind was screaming. At lunch, I walked down the hall to the legal department of the Northline Impact Fund. I knocked on the door of Sarah Jenkins, a junior counsel I had shared lunch with a few times. She was sharp, cynical, and owed me a favor for helping her fix a spreadsheet error that would have cost her a weekend of work. "Hey, Lauren," she said, looking up from a stack of files. "You look like hell. Everything okay?" I closed the door behind me and locked it. Sarah's eyebrows went up. "Okay, that is dramatic. What is going on?" I sat down. I didn't open the folder. I just put my hands on her desk. "I have a hypothetical situation," I said. "For a case study I'm working on. A theoretical case regarding financial elder abuse and veteran identity theft." Sarah leaned back, crossing her arms. She didn't buy the case study line for a second, but she played along. "Okay, hit me with the theory." "Suppose," I began, "that a guardian has a power of attorney for a service member. Suppose that power of attorney expired 7 years ago, but the guardian forged a renewal and used it to open a shell corporation in the service member's name. And suppose that guardian is now using that shell corporation to divert a percentage of a $50 million charitable donation into their own pocket, using the service member's trust fund as collateral." Sarah stared at me. The playful look vanished from her face. She sat up straighter. "And," I continued, my voice trembling slightly, "suppose the guardian is also creating a documented paper trail claiming the service member is mentally incompetent due to PTSD, to prevent the bank from asking questions." Sarah was silent for a long time. She looked at the locked door, then back at me. "Lauren," she said softly, "in this hypothetical, does the service member have proof or just suspicion?" I opened the folder. I slid the single page across the desk, the page with the 2 signatures, my forged name next to Valerie's. Sarah picked it up. She adjusted her glasses. She read the text. She looked at the signature. Then she looked at the date. "This is a felony," she said. Her voice was flat, professional, and terrifyingly serious. "This is multiple felonies. We are talking about wire fraud, bank fraud, forgery, identity theft, and aggravated abuse of a vulnerable adult. If the victim is a veteran and the perpetrator used their deployment status to facilitate the fraud, federal prosecutors would have a field day. They would eat this person alive." "And the clause about the trust fund?" I asked. "It is predatory," Sarah said. "It is converting a fiduciary duty into a theft mechanism. If this document is real, the person who signed it isn't just a thief, they are a vampire." She slid the paper back to me. She didn't ask if it was my family. She didn't ask if it was the Hayes donation everyone was talking about. She knew. "If this were my case," Sarah said, looking me dead in the eye, "I would tell the client not to confront the perpetrator alone. I would tell them that the perpetrator has likely insulated themselves with layers of plausible deniability. I would tell the client to find an external ally, someone who isn't afraid of the family name." "Thank you, Sarah," I whispered, "for the input on the case study." "One more thing," Sarah said as I stood up. "In this scenario, the money is the least of the problems. People who steal $50 million don't stop because you ask them nicely. They stop when you put them in handcuffs. Be careful." I walked out of her office. I felt lighter, but also colder. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a family dispute. It was a crime scene. I went back to my desk. I looked at the calendar. The gala was in 48 hours. Valerie thought she was walking into a coronation. She thought I was the cracked, broken pawn she could move around the board to shield her king. I opened my email. I found the RSVP confirmation for the gala. I wasn't going to be a pawn. I was going to be the one who flipped the table. Sarah Jenkins was true to her word. 2 hours after I left her office, a secure email arrived in my personal inbox containing a single contact card. It was for the Veterans Legal Advocacy Group, specifically for a senior attorney named Daniel Cross. The note attached was brief. He used to be a JAG officer in the Navy. "He eats fraudsters for breakfast. Call him." I met Daniel the next morning. His office was the antithesis of the glossy, glass-walled world Valerie inhabited. It was located in a converted warehouse in the industrial district, smelling faintly of old coffee and rain. Daniel himself was a man in his late 40s with graying temples and the kind of intense, unblinking stare that I recognized immediately. It was the stare of a man who had spent years reading court-martial transcripts. He didn't offer me tea or sympathy. He pointed to the chair opposite his desk and asked to see the file. I laid it all out. The forged signature on the Keaton Legacy Initiative contract, the timeline of my deployments coinciding with the bank transfers, the medical emails Valerie had sent to Marcus Thorne painting me as incompetent. Daniel read in silence for 20 minutes. The only sound in the room was the scratching of his pen as he made notes in the margins of a yellow legal pad. When he finally looked up, his expression was not one of shock, but of cold, professional satisfaction. "You are not just a victim of theft, Lauren," Daniel said, leaning back in his chair. "You are a walking, breathing RICO case waiting to happen." "So we can stop them?" I asked, my hands clasped tight in my lap. "We can stop the donation?" "We could," Daniel said slowly. "I could file an emergency injunction right now. We could allege fraud, freeze the accounts, and halt the gala. But if we do that today, Valerie spins it. She will go to the press and say that her mentally unstable stepdaughter is having a breakdown and attacking the family's charitable work. She will bury the evidence of the shell company before a forensic accountant even gets in the door. She will settle out of court, pay a fine, and keep her reputation." He leaned forward, tapping the page with my forged signature. "You are standing on a gold mine of evidence," he said. "But you do not detonate the explosives the moment you find the target. You wait until the target is fully exposed." "The gala," I realized. "The gala," Daniel confirmed. "Right now, the Keaton Legacy Initiative is just a piece of paper, but on the night of the event, once the donation is publicly formalized, Once the checks are symbolically signed, that is when the crime moves from conspiracy to execution. That is when the wire fraud becomes irreversible, and that is when we catch them with their hands in the vault. He explained the legal mechanics. My power of attorney had expired the moment I touched down on American soil as a civilian. The implied renewal Valerie had filed was legally void, but the most damning piece was the use of my trust fund as collateral. Fiduciary duty is not a suggestion, Daniel said, his voice hard. A trustee cannot use the beneficiary's assets to fund their own salary. That is embezzlement. Plain and simple. Valerie isn't just greedy. She is sloppy. She got arrogant. We were interrupting our strategy session when my phone buzzed on the desk. I glanced at it, expecting another harassing text from Valerie. It was a number I didn't recognize. Ignore it, Daniel said. It might be the nursing home, I said, thinking of Grandpa Walter. If something happened to him. I picked it up. This is Lauren. Lauren Keaton? The voice on the other end was female, crisp, and professional. It sounded vaguely familiar, like a voice I had heard on the radio. Yes, who is this? This is Maya Rhodes. I froze. Maya Rhodes was the anchor of the city's biggest evening news broadcast. She was also the woman hosting the gala in 2 days. Ms. Rhodes? I asked, looking at Daniel. He frowned, signaling for me to put it on speaker. Please, call me Maya, she said. Listen, Lauren, I know this is out of the blue. You might remember me. I interviewed you about 5 years ago for a piece on logistics officers supporting humanitarian aid. I remember, I said. Why are you calling me? I received a package this morning, Maya said. Her tone dropped, losing its polished anchor quality and becoming urgent. It was left at the station's front desk, anonymous, no return address. It contained a thumb drive with some very disturbing financial documents regarding the Hayes Community Foundation, and your name is all over them. I felt a jolt of electricity. I hadn't sent it. Daniel hadn't sent it. That meant there was someone else, a whistleblower inside the foundation, a disgruntled bank employee. What kind of documents? I asked. Drafts of a service agreement, Maya said. Something called the Keaton Legacy Initiative. It looks like a kickback scheme, Lauren, and it lists you as a co-signer. I wanted to run the story, but my producer killed it. He said without verification, it is libel against a major philanthropist, but I needed to hear it from you. Did you sign that? No, I said. I did not. Can you meet me? Maya asked. Not at the station, somewhere quiet, 30 minutes. I looked at Daniel. He nodded once, sharp and decisive. I will be there, I said. I met Maya at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the waterfront. She was wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, trying to look inconspicuous, but her posture gave her away. She sat with the alertness of an investigative journalist hunting a lead. I sat down across from her and didn't say a word. I simply reached into my bag, pulled out my own folder, the one with the red-circled timeline and the scanned forgery, and slid it across the table. It seems we are looking at the same puzzle, I said. Maya opened the folder. She scanned the timeline I had built. She looked at the email from Marcus Thorne regarding my mental incompetence. When she looked up, her eyes were hard. I knew it. I knew Valerie was too polished. Nobody is that perfect. She is stealing $50 million, I said quietly. She is funneling it through this initiative so she can draw a salary for the rest of her life. And she is using my name to do it so that if she gets caught, she can blame the crazy veteran daughter. Maya closed the folder. If this is true, the gala isn't a celebration. It is a crime scene. It is a money laundering operation broadcast live on television. That is exactly what my lawyer said. I told her. Maya leaned in. Lauren, there is something you need to know. Something I haven't shown anyone, not even my producer. She pulled out her phone and opened a video file. I interviewed Walter about 6 months ago, she said. Right before his stroke, we were doing a profile on his early days in the marine supply business. We recorded a segment about his estate planning that never made it to air because Valerie's publicist threatened to sue the station if we ran it. She claimed he was confused and misspoke. Maya pressed play and handed me the phone. On the small screen, my grandfather was sitting on a bench by the marina. The wind was blowing his white hair. He looked frail, but his eyes were clear. "You know, Maya," Walter's voice came through the speaker, raspy but firm. "The trouble with money is that it attracts parasites. Even in your own house, I have decided to give it all away. 50 million, all of it." "That is a generous gift," Maya's voice said from behind the camera. "Will your family be involved in managing the donation?" Walter laughed. It was a dry, bitter sound. "God, I hope not. I love my son. But he has no spine. And his wife? Valerie thinks charity is just a tax write-off that comes with a cocktail party. No, I want the money to go to the people, direct to the foundation. No middlemen, no family retainers. If I find out a single cent has gone into a Keaton pocket, I will come back from the grave and haunt them. You can quote me on that." The video ended. I stared at the black screen, tears pricking the corners of my eyes. He knew. He had known exactly who she was. That was why she had isolated him. That was why she had cut the phone lines. She wasn't protecting his health. She was suppressing his testimony. "She buried this," I whispered. "She tried," Maya said. "But I kept the raw footage. I just didn't have a reason to use it until I saw your signature on that fraudulent contract. That contract contradicts everything Walter told me." The three of us, Daniel, Maya, and I, formed a war council by conference call 10 minutes later. The plan was terrifyingly simple. We would let the gala proceed. We would let Valerie walk the red carpet. We would let her stand on that stage and bask in the adulation. We needed her to be at the height of her arrogance. Daniel would file a quitam action, a whistleblower lawsuit, electronically at 5 o'clock on the day of the gala. He would also send a formal legal notice to the Hayes Community Foundation's compliance officer, flagging every document with my name on it as a forgery. This would trigger an automatic internal freeze on the funds the moment the donation was executed. But the public execution? That was up to Maya and me. "I can deviate from the script," Maya said over the speakerphone. "I am the MC. I control the microphone. But Lauren, if I do this, if I call you out there instead of her, it is going to be chaos. You are going to be humiliating your father. You are going to be destroying your family's reputation on live television. Are you sure you want to do that?" I looked out the window of the coffee shop. I saw the city skyline. I saw the bridges my grandfather had helped build. I thought about the small, drafty house where I grew up, and the way Valerie had erased my mother's photos. I thought about the Go to Hell Fund and the look on Valerie's face when she slapped me. "My father made his choice," I said. "He chose comfort over truth, and Valerie, she chose to make me an enemy." "Is that a yes?" Maya asked. "Grandpa Walter told me once that independence is the only gift worth having," I said. "He taught me not to let money make me a coward. If I stay silent, I am letting her buy my silence with his money. I am in—" "Good," Daniel said, his voice crackling with anticipation. "I just sent the initial discovery request to the Foundation's legal team. I marked it as high priority. They won't tell Valerie yet because they will be too busy panicking. By the time she realizes she is under a microscope, she will be under the spotlight. One more thing," I said to Maya. "When you call me up there, don't introduce me as Valerie's daughter. How do you want to be introduced?" "As the person Walter Hayes actually trusted," I said. We ended the call. Maya stood up and adjusted her sunglasses. She reached out and squeezed my hand. "Get a good dress, Lauren," she said, a small, fierce smile playing on her lips. "If you are going into battle, you should look like you have already won." I walked home with a strange sense of calm. The fear was gone. The anxiety of being the poor, unstable veteran had evaporated. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was an operative on a mission. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I went to a boutique I couldn't really afford and bought a navy blue dress. It wasn't flashy. It was structured, severe, and elegant. It looked like something a woman would wear to a board meeting where she intended to fire everyone. I packed my evidence. I put the original flash drive in my purse. I put a backup copy in a necklace locket I wore. Valerie sent me one last text on the morning of the gala. "See you tonight. Try to smile. We have a big check to accept." I looked at the screen and didn't reply. She had no idea. She thought she was the director of this play. She didn't realize that the cast had mutinied. The stage manager was a double agent, and the audience was about to witness a demolition. I was ready to burn the house down, but this time, I held the matches. The Hayes Harbor Convention Hall was not just illuminated, it was under assault by light. 6 massive spotlights swept the night sky outside, while inside, a galaxy of crystal chandeliers vibrated with the bass of a string quartet that had been amplified to fill the cavernous space. The air was thick with the scent of expensive catering, truffle oil, seared beef, and champagne, layered over the deeper, metallic smell of industrial air conditioning fighting a losing battle against 600 warm bodies. I arrived alone. I stepped out of a generic sedan at the end of the drop-off line, ignoring the valets who were rushing to open the doors of the Bentleys and Mercedes ahead of me. I was wearing the navy dress I had bought 2 days ago. It was severe, high-necked, and long-sleeved, a deliberate contrast to the sea of sequins and exposed skin around me. I did not come here to sparkle. I came here to work. I stood near the entrance for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the glare. My hand went instinctively to my clutch, feeling the hard, rectangular outline of the flash drive through the leather. It was my weapon, and knowing it was there settled my heart rate. The main hall was a masterpiece of manipulation. The center of gravity was the stage, where a massive digital backdrop displayed a slow-motion loop of crashing waves and shipping containers, overlaid with gold typography, the Hayes $50 million community promise. And there, in the bottom right corner, small but impossible to miss, was a secondary logo. It was a stylized K intertwined with a leaf, the Keaton Legacy Initiative. It was nestled right next to the Foundation's seal, visually implying a partnership that did not legally exist. It was a lie printed in pixels 10 feet tall. I moved into the crowd, keeping to the edges of the room. I watched Valerie. She was in her element. She was wearing silver, a dress that looked like it was made of liquid moonlight, and she was moving from donor to donor with the predatory grace of a politician in the final week of a campaign. I saw her grip the hand of the mayor, leaning in close to whisper something that made him laugh. I saw her touch the arm of the hospital CEO, nodding with a practiced look of grave humility. I could practically hear the script she was reciting. "Oh, it is all Walter. I am just the vessel. I just want to make sure his vision is executed perfectly." My father, Richard, was trailing 3 steps behind her. He looked like a ghost in a tuxedo. He held a glass of scotch that he wasn't drinking, just clutching it like a talisman. He nodded when Valerie nodded. He laughed when Valerie laughed. He scanned the room with nervous, darting eyes, and for a split second, his gaze locked with mine across the sea of tables. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He looked at me with a mixture of shame and panic, and then he immediately looked down at his shoes, pretending to inspect a scuff on the leather. That broke my heart more than the theft. He knew, on some level, he had to know what she was doing, and he had chosen the path of least resistance. "It is going to be a game changer, man." A loud voice drifted over from a nearby high-top table. I turned slightly. It was Tyler, my half-brother. He was holding court with 3 of his college friends, guys in rented tuxedos who looked like they were playing dress-up. Tyler was flushed, his tie already loosened. $50 million is the principal, Tyler was saying, gesturing wildly with a champagne flute. But the management fees? The interest? That is where the real play is. Mom set up this side vehicle, the initiative. I am going to be heading up the Impact Startup division. We are going to be angel investors, basically. But with nonprofit capital, it is genius. I felt bile rise in my throat. He didn't even understand the crime. He thought it was clever business. He thought the money my grandfather had sweated for on the docks of the Columbia River was just seed money for him to play venture capitalist. He had no idea that the side vehicle was fueled by my identity and secured by my safety net. I moved away before I said something that would blow my cover. I needed to be invisible until the trap was sprung. I navigated through the tables, listening to the chatter. The narrative Valerie had planted was taking root. "It is wonderful that the family is so involved," a woman in emerald silk said to her husband. "Usually these big donations get swallowed up by administrative bloat, but with Valerie running the initiative, you know the money will be watched like a hawk." "I heard the stepdaughter's involved too," the husband replied. The veteran, "I heard she signed off on the whole structure, keeps it all in the house." "Well, good for her," the woman said. "I heard she had some trouble adjusting. Nice that Valerie gave her a purpose." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. It was working. The lie was becoming the truth, solidified by cocktail chatter and social validation. If I walked away tonight, history would record Valerie as the saint and me as the charity case she saved. I looked toward the stage. Maya Rhodes was reviewing her cue cards near the podium. She looked professional, calm, and utterly detached. Then, she looked up. Her eyes scanned the room, bypassing the billionaires and the politicians, and found me standing near a pillar. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The signal, "We are ready." "Lauren, there you are!" The voice was shrill and commanding. I stiffened. Valerie had found me. She descended on me with a photographer in tow. The smile on her face was terrified and terrifying, a rictus of teeth and tension. "We need a family photo," she announced, loud enough for the people at the nearest table to hear. "For the archives. Come on. Richard, Tyler." My father shuffled over. Tyler stumbled up, grinning. Valerie grabbed my arm. Her fingers dug into my bicep with bruising force, but to the camera, it looked like a loving embrace. "Smile," she hissed through her teeth, leaning her head close to mine. "Do not look sullen. You look like a funeral director in that dress. Fix your face." "I am just happy to be here." "Valerie," I said, my voice flat. "You better be," she whispered. "After everything I have done to cover for you." The photographer raised his camera. "Okay, big smiles. Family unity on 3. 1, 2. As the flash blinded me, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. A second cameraman, one wearing a generic black t-shirt and a press pass, was standing slightly to the side. He wasn't taking photos. He was holding a video camera, and the red recording light was steady. He wasn't focusing on our smiles. He was zooming in on Valerie's hand gripping my arm. He was capturing the tension in my father's jaw. Daniel had come through. We were documenting the coercion. "Beautiful," Valerie declared, releasing me instantly as soon as the flash died. She smoothed her dress. "Now, go find your seat. Table 19. It is in the back. But the sight lines are decent. Try not to draw attention to yourself." I watched her walk away, rallying her troops. She thought she had just managed a crisis. She didn't know she had just provided Exhibit B. I found Table 19. It was indeed in the back, near the kitchen doors. The other seats were empty, likely reserved for lower-tier foundation staff who were too busy working to sit, but one chair was occupied. A woman in her 60s, wearing a sensible gray suit, looked up as I sat down. I recognized her from the Foundation's website. She was a board member, one of the old guard. "You are Lauren?" she said. It wasn't a question. "I am," I said, unfolding my napkin. "I am Margaret," she said. "I worked with your grandfather on the port revitalization project in the 90s. He was a stubborn man." "He still is," I said. Margaret studied me. "I heard you are taking a leadership role in the new initiative, following in your stepmother's footsteps." I looked at this woman, a woman who actually cared about the work, and I felt a sudden urge to protect her from the lie. "Is that what you heard?" I asked. "Valerie speaks very highly of your rehabilitation," Margaret said, choosing her words carefully. "She says you need a lot of guidance, but that you are eager to learn the family business." I took a sip of water. It was ice cold. "Margaret, let me tell you something about guidance. Sometimes the person holding the map is the one who is lost, and sometimes They are just leading you off a cliff." Margaret frowned, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. "That is an interesting way to put it." "I think tonight is going to clarify a lot of things," I said, "about who is leading whom, and about where exactly this money is going." Before she could ask me what I meant, the lights in the hall dimmed. The conversation in the room died down to a hush. A spotlight hit the stage, and the massive screen flickered to life. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed, "please turn your attention to the screen for a tribute to the man of the hour, Walter Hayes." The video began. It was beautiful. It started with black and white photos of my grandfather as a young man, standing on a fishing boat in the rain. It showed him building the first warehouse. It showed him shaking hands with union workers. It showed the gritty, unglamorous reality of how the fortune was made. Then, the interview clip started. It was the footage Maya had shot, but heavily edited. "I built this company with my bare hands," Walter's voice said on the screen. He looked frail but fierce, and I always knew that in the end, the money didn't belong to me. It belongs to the city that let me build it. The audience applauded politely. But then, the tone of the video shifted. The music swelled from acoustic guitar to an orchestral crescendo. The images of the docks were replaced by images of Valerie. Valerie at a ribbon cutting. Valerie pointing at a blueprint. Valerie holding Walter's hand in the hospital. A narrator's voice, smooth and corporate, took over. "But a legacy needs a guardian," the narrator said, and in his final chapter, Walter Hayes found that guardian in his devoted family, under the stewardship of Valerie Keaton and the newly formed Keaton Legacy Initiative. The Hayes donation will ensure that the family's values are protected for generations to come. The logo for the Keaton Legacy Initiative faded onto the screen, superimposed over my grandfather's face until he was completely obscured by the gold K. I felt a physical kick to my stomach. It was a desecration. She had taken his words, his life, his sacrifice, and she had pasted her own brand over it. She had literally erased him to make room for her logo. The audience burst into thunderous applause. They were cheering for the lie. They were cheering for the parasite that had consumed the host. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room felt suddenly hot and void of oxygen. I needed to get out. I needed to get backstage. I needed to be ready for the moment the video ended and the speeches began. I stood up abruptly, knocking my chair back. Margaret looked at me with concern. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked. "No," I said, my voice trembling with a rage so pure it felt like clarity. "I am not, but I am about to be." I turned and walked away from the table. I didn't head for the lobby. I headed for the service entrance near the stage-left curtain. I walked past the waiters carrying trays of filet mignon. I walked past the security guard who saw my family resemblance and let me pass without a word. I stepped into the backstage area. The noise of the applause muffled instantly, replaced by the hum of amplifiers and the low chatter of the stage crew. It was darker here, the air cooler. I walked toward the wings, my heels clicking on the concrete floor. And there she was. Valerie was standing just behind the heavy velvet curtain, watching the screen on a monitor, waiting for her cue. She was checking her makeup in a compact mirror. She looked triumphant. She looked like a woman who had just pulled off the heist of the century and was waiting for her trophy. I walked up behind her. I didn't try to be quiet. She turned. When she saw me, her smile dropped. The mask slipped. "What are you doing back here?" she hissed, snapping the compact shut. "Get back to your seat." "I saw the video." "Valerie," I said, stepping into her personal space. "You erased him." "I improved him," she whispered, her eyes narrowing. "I made him marketable. Nobody wants to see a senile old man giving away his fortune. They want a dynasty. They want a story." "It is theft," I said, lifting my hand to show her the flash drive I was clutching. "And this drive proves it. It proves the forgery. It proves the shell company. It proves you used my name." Valerie froze. Her eyes locked onto the silver drive. She recognized the threat instantly. The applause out in the hall was reaching a crescendo. The video was ending. Maya was about to walk out. "You wouldn't," Valerie said, her voice low and dangerous. "I am going to give this to Maya," I said, "and she is going to give it to the authorities, tonight." Valerie's face twisted. The elegance vanished. The socialite vanished. The predator surfaced. "You will not destroy this family," she snarled. And then she swung. The air behind the curtain was stagnant, trapped between the heat of the stage lights and the cold draft of the loading dock. I stood there, my feet planted on the taped-down cables, clutching the silver flash drive in my right hand as if it were the detonator to a bomb. In a way, it contained the scanned contract with the forged signature, the timeline of bank transfers Daniel had helped me build, and the digital trail of Valerie's theft. Valerie stood between me and the stage entrance. Her chest was heaving beneath the silver sequins of her gown. She had smelled the insurrection on me the moment I walked backstage. My refusal to smile for the photos, my coldness at the table, the way I had tracked her movements. She knew the game had changed. "Give it to me," she hissed, extending a manicured hand. Her voice wasn't the polished purr of the socialite anymore. It was guttural. "Give me the drive. Lauren, do not make a scene." "The scene is already made," I said, my voice low and steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "It is in the contract. Valerie, the one you signed with my name. If I hand this to Maya, the Keaton Legacy Initiative will be frozen by the Foundation's compliance officers before you can withdraw a single cent." Valerie's eyes widened. The whites of them looked stark against her heavy stage makeup. She realized I wasn't just bluffing. I knew the name of the shell company. I knew the mechanism. "You ungrateful little bitch," she whispered. "I kept a roof over your head. I managed your father's mess. You stole from a stroke victim," I countered. "And you used my service record to cover your tracks." She lunged. It wasn't a graceful movement. It was a desperate, clawing grab. Her fingers locked around my wrist, her nails digging into the soft skin of my forearm, trying to wrench my fist open. "Let go!" I shouted, twisting my arm away using a leverage technique I had learned in basic training. I broke her grip. Stepping back, Valerie stumbled, her high heels slipping on the concrete floor. She regained her balance instantly, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. The carefully constructed persona of the benevolent matriarch evaporated. In its place was a cornered animal. She didn't scream. She didn't call for help. She swung. Her hand cracked across my face with the force of a whip. It wasn't a disciplinary slap. It was a full-force strike from a grown woman intending to do damage. Her palm connected with my cheekbone and ear with a sickening, wet thud that echoed in the small backstage corridor. The force of it sent me reeling sideways. My head snapped to the right, and my vision exploded into a kaleidoscope of white spots and darkness. I lost my footing and crashed shoulder first into the metal fire door behind me. The impact knocked the wind out of my lungs. I slid down the door, my knees hitting the concrete. My ear was ringing, a high-pitched whine that drowned out the muffled applause from the auditorium. My cheek felt like it had been branded with a hot iron. But my training took over before my conscious mind could process the pain. Protect the asset. I didn't drop the drive. I curled my fingers tighter around it, tucking my hand into my stomach, pulling my knees up to protect my head. I anticipated a kick. I anticipated a follow-up attack. Valerie stood over me, breathing hard, her hands suspended in the air, trembling. She looked at me, 32 years old, a veteran, cowering on the floor in a ball gown, and for a split second, she looked satisfied. Then, movement in the shadows caught her eye. A young stagehand, a boy no older than 20 with a headset around his neck, had stepped out from behind a stack of speakers. He was staring at us, his mouth open, his clipboard hanging loosely by his side. He had seen the hit. He had seen the violence. Valerie froze. The calculation in her eyes was instantaneous and terrifying. She dropped her hand. Her shoulders slumped. Her face softened from rage to frantic concern in less than a heartbeat. "Oh my God! Lauren! She cried out, her voice pitching up, loud enough for the stagehand to hear. She dropped to her knees beside me, reaching for my shoulders. Lauren, honey, can you hear me? You are having an episode. Breathe. I flinched away from her touch, scrambling backward against the wall. Don't touch me, I gasped, my voice thick with shock. Valerie grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into the bruise she had just made, squeezing hard enough to cause fresh pain. She leaned in close, her face inches from mine. To the stagehand, it looked like a mother comforting a distraught daughter. But her whisper was venom. If you say a word, she hissed into my ringing ear, if you try to tell anyone I hit you, I will tell them you threw yourself against the wall. I will tell them the lights triggered your PTSD. I have the emails. Lauren, I have the doctors lined up. I will have you committed before the gala is over. I looked at her, seeing the monster behind the mask. The gaslighting wasn't just a tactic, it was her reality. She was already rewriting the history of the last 10 seconds. You hit me, I stammered, touching my cheek. It was throbbing, hot and swollen. You fell, Valerie corrected, her eyes hard as flint. You were confused. You were having a flashback. Poor Lauren. The stagehand took a hesitant step forward. Is everything okay, Ms. Keaton? Valerie looked up at him, her eyes glistening with practiced tears. She is fine. It is just the stress, the noise, my daughter. She struggles sometimes. Please, give us a moment. The boy looked at me, then at Valerie. He was uncomfortable. He didn't want to be part of this. He nodded and retreated into the shadows, leaving us alone. But he wasn't the only witness. I looked up, past Valerie's shoulder. In the corner of the high ceiling, blinking with a steady red rhythm, was a security camera. It was pointed directly at the fire door. Valerie hadn't seen it. She was too focused on the human element. She didn't know that the building's passive surveillance system had just recorded a felony assault in high definition. Get up, Valerie ordered, her voice dropping the sugary pretense now that the boy was gone. She stood up and smoothed her silver dress. Fix your hair. You look deranged. We are going on stage in 2 minutes. I used the wall to pull myself up. My legs were shaking. Not from fear, but from adrenaline. The pain in my face was sharpening into a dull, throbbing ache. I could feel the heat of the mark spreading across my cheek. Ms. Keaton? Mrs. Keaton? A production assistant with a headset hurried over, holding a clipboard. They are wrapping up the video package. Maya is doing the intro. You are on in 60 seconds. Valerie took a deep breath. She checked her reflection in the glass of a fire extinguisher cabinet. She patted a stray hair into place. She turned to me, reached out, and brushed a piece of lint off my shoulder. Smile, she whispered. Remember, you signed those papers. If I go down, you go down with me as a co-conspirator. So you are going to walk out there. You are going to wave, and you are going to keep your mouth shut. She turned and walked toward the gap in the curtains. Her posture perfect, her head held high. She was ready to accept $50 million. I stood there for a second, steadying my breathing. In, out. I looked at the flash drive in my hand. I slipped it into the side pocket of my dress. I walked toward the stage entrance. Through the gap in the heavy velvet, I could see the stage. It was blindingly bright. Maya Rhodes stood at the podium, bathed in a spotlight. She looked impeccable in a cream-colored suit, but her body language was tense. She was holding the cue cards, but her eyes weren't on them. She was looking toward the wings. She was looking for me. I stepped into the periphery of the light. Maya saw me. Her eyes widened slightly. Even from 20 feet away, she could see it. The angry red welt on my left cheekbone was impossible to miss against my pale skin. Maya's gaze shifted from my face to Valerie, who was standing a few feet in front of me, beaming at the audience that couldn't see her yet. Maya's jaw tightened. She understood. The violence wasn't theoretical anymore. At that exact moment, the stage manager's voice crackled in Maya's earpiece. I was close enough to the monitor console to hear the feed. "Okay, Maya. Change of plans," the director's voice said. Urgent and loud. The family requested a spotlight on Unity. Skip the individual bio for the granddaughter. Just introduce Valerie as the primary trustee and head of the new initiative. Make it clear she is the successor. Go. I saw Maya look down at the script on the podium. Someone had taken a black marker to it. My name had been crossed out. In the margins, handwritten notes emphasized Valerie Keaton. Visionary. Valerie had gotten to the production booth. She had edited me out of the show in real time. My heart sank. If Maya followed the script, Valerie would walk out, take the microphone, and spin a web so thick I would never break through. She would control the narrative before I even stepped on stage. But then, I saw Maya's hand move. She didn't reach for the script. She reached into the inner pocket of her jacket. She pulled out a white, sealed envelope, the one Daniel had given her earlier that day, the one he had told her to use only if she felt the truth was the only option left. Maya placed the envelope on top of the crossed-out script. She looked at the director's booth. High up in the back of the hall, she tapped her earpiece, as if to silence the voice telling her what to say. The video on the giant screen behind her faded to black. The final image of the Keaton Legacy Initiative logo lingered for a second before dissolving. The audience applauded, a polite ripple that grew into expectant silence. Maya leaned into the microphone. The hall went deadly quiet. "Tonight," Maya began, her voice clear and resonant, echoing through the massive space. "We have heard a lot about legacy. We have seen videos. We have heard speeches about the future." Valerie took a step forward, prepping her smile. Assuming this was her cue, she adjusted her diamond bracelet, ready to wave. "But Walter Hayes was a man who believed in transparency," Maya continued. She wasn't reading from the teleprompter. She was looking straight ahead, her eyes fierce. "He believed that charity should be direct. He believed that the truth is the only currency that matters." Valerie frowned. She stopped moving. This wasn't the intro she had written. "I have been asked to introduce the steward of this $50 million donation," Maya said. "The person Walter Hayes entrusted with his vision." Valerie took another step. She was confused, but her ego pushed her forward. She assumed Maya was just adding dramatic flair. "However," Maya said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming steel, "the script I was given tonight tells a story that does not match the facts." A murmur went through the crowd. People shifted in their seats. The director was screaming in Maya's ear now. I could hear the tinny shout from the console, but Maya ignored it. "The person I am about to introduce is not the one listed in your programs," Maya said. "She is not the one who claims to have written the new initiative." Valerie froze completely. Her back was to me, but I saw her spine stiffen. She realized, with horror, that the train was jumping the tracks. Maya turned her head. She didn't look at the teleprompter. She didn't look at the camera. She looked past the blinding lights, past the edge of the curtain, directly into the shadows where Valerie and I stood. "Please welcome," Maya said, shouting the name so it rang like a judgment. "The true beneficiary of the Hayes Trust, the only person Walter Hayes actually authorized to speak for him tonight, Lauren Keaton." The name hit the room like a physical shockwave. For 3 seconds, there was absolute silence. Valerie stood there, halfway onto the stage, stranded in the light. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The smile she had prepared was gone, replaced by a look of naked shock. I took a deep breath. The pain in my cheek was throbbing, a steady drumbeat of reality. I didn't try to hide it. I didn't check my hair. I stepped out from behind the curtain. I walked past Valerie. I didn't look at her. I walked straight into the spotlight. The audience gasped. It wasn't the polite gasp of surprise. It was the horrified gasp of 600 people seeing a woman in a formal gown with a fresh, angry red handprint covering the side of her face. I stood next to Maya. I looked out at the sea of faces. I looked at the camera with the red tally light. And then I looked at Valerie, who was still standing in the wings, exposed, terrified, and utterly disarmed. The bomb had been dropped. Now, we just had to watch it explode. The silence in the Hayes Harbor Convention Hall was not empty. It was heavy. It was a physical weight that pressed down on the 600 guests, the waiters holding trays of champagne, and the family standing in the wings. When Maya Rhodes called my name, she didn't just change the schedule. She broke the spell. I heard the whispers start in the front row and roll backward like a wave. Lauren? Who is Lauren? I thought this was Valerie's project. Isn't that the daughter who has problems? Valerie stood 10 feet away from me, caught in the no man's land between the curtain and the podium. Her face was a study in structural collapse. The smile she had plastered on for the cameras had detached itself, leaving behind a blank, terrified stare. She looked at Maya, then at me, and for the first time in her life, she didn't know what to do. She was a creature of scripts and rehearsals, and she had just been shoved onto a stage where she didn't know the lines. I stepped fully into the light. The heat of the spotlights was intense, almost physical. It hit my face, illuminating everything. I knew what they were seeing. They were seeing the simple navy dress that looked severe compared to the sea of sequins. They were seeing my posture, rigid and military straight. And, most importantly, they were seeing the left side of my face. The mark Valerie had left on me was blooming. It was an angry, raised red welt that traced the shape of her hand across my cheekbone and down to my jaw. It was impossible to miss in the high-definition glare of the stage lights. I didn't touch it. I didn't try to hide it with my hair. I wore it like a badge of evidence. I walked to the microphone. Maya stepped back, giving me the space, but she stayed close enough to be a shield if I needed one. "Thank you, Maya," I said. My voice was steady. It didn't shake. It didn't crack. It was the voice I used to brief commanders on supply deficits. It was cold, factual, and devoid of the hysteria Valerie had promised everyone I would display. Maya leaned into her own microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, there has been some confusion regarding the structure of the Hayes donation. The program lists Valerie Keaton as the primary architect. However, the trust documents tell a different story. Lauren Keaton is not just a family member. She is the sole beneficiary of the independent trust Walter Hayes established to ensure this money would never be used for personal gain." Valerie took a step toward us. "This is ridiculous," she hissed, loud enough for the front tables to hear. "She is not well. Maya, cut the mic." Maya ignored her. She pointed a remote at the massive screen behind us. "Before we proceed, I think it is important to hear from the donor himself, not through a narrator, not through a press release, but in his own words." The screen flickered. The slick, corporate logo of the Keaton Legacy Initiative vanished. In its place, the raw, grainy footage from Maya's phone appeared. It was blown up to 40 feet high. My grandfather, Walter Hayes, sat on a park bench. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp, sharper than they had been in years. The audio boomed through the hall, cutting through the murmurs. "I love my family," Walter's voice echoed, filling the room. "But I am not blind. There are people close to me who look at this fortune and see a personal piggy bank. They see status. They see power." "In the video," Maya asked, "so how do you want the $50 million handled?" Walter leaned into the camera. His face was massive on the screen, looming over Valerie like a judgment from the afterlife. "Directly to the foundation," he said. "No middlemen, no administrative fees siphoned off for consulting. I want every dime to go to the city. If I find out that any member of my family has set up a side deal to profit from this, I will consider it theft. Money in the hands of the greedy is not charity. It is just a long con." The video cut to black. The silence in the room was now absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Valerie stood frozen. Her hands were clenched at her sides. She looked at the black screen, then out at the audience. She saw the mayor frowning. She saw the hospital CEO whispering to his wife. The narrative was cracking. Maya stepped forward again. She was holding a piece of paper. The email I had given her. the one from the Foundation's internal legal counsel. We received a communication 20 minutes ago from the compliance office of the Hayes Community Foundation, Maya read, her voice professional and detached. They have flagged the entity known as the Keaton Legacy Initiative for immediate review. It appears that the signatures authorizing this entity to manage the donation funds are irregular. Daniel Cross was sitting in the third row, right behind the reserved family table. I saw him lift his phone. He wasn't texting. He was recording. He was capturing Richard's pale, sweating face. He was capturing Tyler's confusion as he realized his impact startup job was evaporating in real time. And he was capturing Valerie, who looked like she was vibrating with suppressed rage. Maya looked at me. "Lauren?" I stepped up to the mic again. I placed my hands on the podium to stop them from trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer adrenaline of the kill. "For the past 6 months," I said, looking directly at the camera lens that was broadcasting this to the monitors in the lobby, "my family has told you a story about me. They have told you that my time in the service broke me. They have told you that I am unstable, that I have PTSD, that I am confused about reality. They used that story to explain why I wasn't at meetings. They used that story to explain why my signature appeared on documents I never saw." I paused. I let the words sink in. "I did not sign the agreement for the Keaton Legacy Initiative," I said clearly. "I did not authorize the use of my personal trust fund as collateral for this project, and I certainly did not agree to divert $1 million a year in management fees to my stepmother." A collective gasp went through the room. $1 million. The number hung in the air. "I have submitted a full audit request to the Veterans Legal Advocacy Group," I continued. "And tonight, I am reclaiming my name. I am not a prop for a fraud. I am a logistics officer, and I know a theft when I see one." I looked down at Margaret, the board member I had sat with earlier. She was staring at me, her mouth a tight line. She stood up slowly. She didn't need a microphone. Her voice was projected by pure authority. "As a senior member of the Oversight Committee," Margaret announced, her voice cutting across the room, "I am formally moving to freeze all assets related to this donation immediately. No funds will be transferred to the Keaton Legacy Initiative or any affiliated entity until a forensic audit is complete." It was the death knell. The money was gone. The salary was gone. The prestige was gone. Valerie snapped. It happened fast, the pressure cooker of her ambition, sealed tight for 20 years, finally exploded. She didn't care about the cameras anymore. She didn't care about the guests. She only knew that I had taken everything from her. She lunged up the 3 stairs onto the stage. Her silver dress caught the light, making her look like a jagged knife. She grabbed the microphone stand, wrenching it toward her. "Lies," she screamed. Her voice cracked, shrill and ugly. "She is lying. Look at her. She is having an episode. It is the PTSD. She is delusional." My father, Richard, stood up at his table. "Valerie, stop," he shouted, but his voice was weak, lost in the cavernous room. Valerie pointed a shaking finger at me. "She made it all up. She forged those papers herself to frame me because she is jealous. She is sick. She needs to be in a hospital, not on a stage." She turned to the crowd, her chest heaving, her eyes wild. "You know me. You know who I am. I have served this community. You are going to take the word of a mental patient over mine?" I didn't argue. I didn't scream back. I just looked at Maya and nodded. Maya signaled the control booth. "We have one more video," Maya said calmly into her lapel mic. "This was recorded 10 minutes ago, backstage." Valerie froze. "What?" The screen behind us lit up again. It was the security footage. It was black and white, high contrast, and high definition. It showed the backstage corridor. It showed me standing near the fire door, holding the drive. It showed Valerie blocking my path. And then, it showed the slap. On the massive screen, the violence was magnified. The audience saw Valerie's arms swing back. They saw the impact. They saw my head snap to the side. They saw me crash into the metal door and slide to the floor. And then they saw Valerie lean over me, grabbing my arm, shaking me. They saw her fix her hair in the reflection of the fire extinguisher case immediately after, checking her appearance while I was cowering on the concrete. The video had no sound, but the cruelty was deafening. The entire hall let out a sound that I will never forget. It was a low, guttural "oh" of pure revulsion. It was the sound of 600 people realizing they had been dining with a monster. Valerie turned slowly to look at the screen. She saw herself, 40 feet tall, striking a cowering woman. There was no context she could invent. There was no PTSD excuse that could explain her own fist connecting with my face. She stood there, dwarfed by her own violence. The silver dress that was supposed to be her armor now looked like a costume. "No," she whispered. The microphone picked it up. "No, that is out of context." "It looks like assault to me," Maya said, her voice cold as ice. Valerie looked out at the audience. She looked for an ally. She looked at the mayor, who was pointedly looking at his phone. She looked at her friends, who were turning their backs. She looked at Richard. My father was standing by the stage. He looked at the screen, then at his wife. He looked at the red mark on my face, the real-life consequence of what was on the screen. "Valerie," Richard said, his voice trembling. "Get down. Get off the stage. You are destroying us." "I was protecting us," Valerie screamed at him, losing all control. "I did this for you. You think you could afford this life without me? You are weak. Richard, you are all weak." Flashbulbs started popping, not the polite, staged photos from the red carpet. These were rapid fire, aggressive flashes. The press had smelled blood. Reporters were standing up, tapping furiously on their phones, recording the meltdown. Valerie realized the cameras were flashing. She tried to put her hands up to shield her face, but it looked like the perp walk of a criminal. She backed away, stumbling in her heels. "Stop it," she shrieked. "Stop filming. I am the trustee. I am the Keaton family." "Not anymore," I said. I didn't shout it. I said it into the silence between her screams. Valerie spun to look at me. Her eyes were filled with a hate so pure it was almost black. She looked like she wanted to hit me again, right there on stage. But she knew. She knew that if she raised her hand now, she wouldn't just lose the money. She would go to jail tonight. She lowered her hand. She looked at me, then at Maya, then at the screen where the loop of her violence was playing over and over again. She broke. It wasn't a dramatic faint. She just deflated. She turned and ran. She ran off the stage, her heels clattering on the wood, pushing past a cameraman, disappearing into the darkness of the wings where she had tried to hide me just an hour ago. The room was left in a stunned, vibrating silence. Maya walked over to the podium. She didn't try to bring the mood back up. She didn't try to make a joke. She looked at the audience, her face serious. "Tonight was supposed to be about $50 million, Maya said. "But money is just paper. What we just saw, that was the cost." She looked at me. I was still standing there, the red mark on my face throbbing. But my head held high. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the witness. Walter Hayes wanted his legacy to be about strength, Maya concluded. "I think we just saw it. It is not about the check. It is about respecting the will of a man who built this city and respecting the autonomy of a woman who served this country. Thank you, and good night." Maya signaled for the house lights. The bright white work lights slammed on, killing the ambiance, ending the party. I looked at Daniel in the third row. He gave me a thumbs up. He had it all, every second of it. I looked at my father. He was sitting with his head in his hands, alone at a table for 10. And then I looked at the empty spot on the stage where Valerie had stood. The spotlight was still shining there, illuminating nothing but dust motes dancing in the air. She was gone. But the truth was finally, irrevocably, here, the morning after the gala. The silence was deafening. But it was the silence of a battlefield after the artillery has stopped firing. The Hayes Community Foundation did not wait for the news cycle to catch up. By 9 o'clock in the morning, Their legal team was in Daniel Cross's office. There were no negotiations about the facts. The evidence I had compiled, combined with the timeline Daniel had constructed, was irrefutable. The scanned contract for the Keaton Legacy Initiative with my forged signature was handed over to the fraud division. The video of the assault, the slap that had been broadcast on a 40-foot screen, was handed over to the district attorney. The machinery of justice, which Valerie had spent her life thinking she could grease with charm and cocktails, suddenly turned its gears against her. The fallout was swift and brutal. The Foundation's internal audit revealed that the Keaton Legacy Initiative was not just a proposal. It was a fully incorporated shell company with bank accounts already set up to receive the management fees, and those accounts were solely under Valerie's control. Valerie was facing a nightmare of her own making. The charges were piling up: aggravated assault, forgery, identity theft, and attempted wire fraud. The assault charge was particularly damning because it wasn't just a family dispute. It was an attack on a vulnerable adult, me, whom she had spent months claiming was mentally incompetent. The irony was razor sharp. By painting me as a disabled veteran to steal my money, she had upgraded her own assault charge to a felony against a protected class. My father, Richard, did exactly what I expected him to do. He folded. He didn't stand by her. He didn't stand by me. He stood by himself. When the police arrived at the penthouse to serve the warrant for Valerie's arrest regarding the assault, Richard wasn't there. He was at a hotel downtown. He had hired a separate criminal defense attorney, claiming he had no knowledge of his wife's business dealings. It was a lie. Of course, he knew. He had signed papers too. But watching him scramble to distance himself from the woman he had allowed to erase my mother was a hollow kind of victory. He wasn't a mastermind. He was just a coward who had realized too late that he was on the sinking ship. Tyler took it the hardest in the most pathetic way. He lost his job before he had even printed business cards. The Impact Startup division of the initiative was dissolved instantly. He went from being the heir apparent of a $50 million empire to being a 24-year-old with a liberal arts degree and a resume that listed a company that didn't exist. I heard from a mutual friend that he was forced to move out of his luxury condo and into a shared apartment with 3 roommates. He was finally going to learn what the economy looked like from the ground level. But my victory wasn't about their downfall. It was about my reconstruction. A week after the gala, the Veterans Legal Advocacy Group asked if I would speak to their board. They didn't want the sensational details of the slap. They wanted the logistics. They wanted to know how I tracked the fraud, how I secured the evidence, and how I reclaimed my identity. I sat in a small conference room with 10 lawyers and shared my case file. I showed them the emails from Marcus Thorne. I showed them the medical gaslighting. This isn't just about rich families, I told them. It is about the assumption that when we come home from service, we are broken, and because people think we are broken. They think we don't notice when they put their hands in our pockets. We turned my case into a template. We built a checklist for returning service members to audit their own financial lives, to check for powers of attorney that shouldn't exist, to secure their credit. It was the most meaningful work I had done since leaving the logistics corps. The foundation came next. Margaret, the board member I had sat with, invited me to lunch. She didn't offer me a job in PR. She didn't ask me to be a face on a billboard. "We need an independent auditor," Margaret said, cutting into her salad. "Someone to sit on the oversight committee for the Hayes donation. Someone who isn't afraid to tell the board when they are wasting money. Your grandfather said you were good with numbers." "I am," I said. "We don't want a Keaton," she said, looking me in the eye. "We want Lauren. We want the person who refused to let $50 million be stolen." I took the job. It was a consulting role, paid at a standard market rate. No millions, no skimming, just honest work for an honest wage, ensuring that Grandpa Walter's money actually built the libraries and clinics he wanted. The media requests poured in. Of course, Good Morning America wanted an exclusive. The tabloids wanted to know the truth about the slap. I turned them all down. I didn't post a victory lap on Facebook. I didn't write a tell-all book. I refused to let my life become a reality show. That was Valerie's world. I lived in the real world. 3 weeks later, the inevitable settlement meeting occurred. It was in a glass-walled conference room at a neutral law firm. Richard and Valerie were there, sitting on one side of the long mahogany table. Their lawyers flanked them like bodyguards. Valerie looked terrible. The veneer was gone. She was wearing a simple gray cardigan, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. It was a calculated look, designed to garner sympathy. But her eyes were rimmed with red that looked genuine. She was out on bail, but the weight of the looming trial was crushing her. My father wouldn't look at me. He stared at his hands. "We want to propose a global settlement," Valerie's lawyer said, sliding a folder across the table. "In exchange for Lauren dropping the civil suit and writing a letter of leniency to the district attorney regarding the assault charge, the Keaton estate is prepared to offer a one-time payment of $200,000. Daniel, sitting next to me, didn't even reach for the folder. He just laughed, a dry, sharp sound. "My client isn't here for money," Daniel said. "It is a generous offer," Richard spoke up, his voice cracking. "Lauren, please, your mother, Valerie. She is terrified. She could go to prison. Think about the family. Think about the embarrassment." I looked at him. "The embarrassment happened when you let her steal from your father. Dad, the embarrassment happened when you watched her hit me and told me to fix my makeup." Valerie looked up. Tears were streaming down her face. "I did it for us," she sobbed. "I was so afraid. Lauren, we were leveraged to the hilt, the penthouse, the cars. If we didn't get the management fees from the donation, we were going to lose everything. I was just trying to keep us afloat. I was under so much pressure." She looked at me with pleading eyes, using the same manipulation tactics she had used for 20 years. She was trying to make me feel responsible for her greed. She was trying to make me the emotional anchor for her sinking ship. "I am sorry I hit you," she whispered. "I was hysterical. I was scared of being poor. You have to understand." I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. I looked at the woman who had erased my mother's photos. I looked at the man who had let her do it. "I don't have to understand anything," I said. My voice was calm, final. "I am not your safety net. I am not your excuse, and I am certainly not your bank." "Lauren, please," Valerie begged, reaching a hand across the table. "We are family." "No," I said. "We are co-defendants in a file you created. I don't want your money. I don't want your $200,000. I want my name back. I want a legal decree that states I had no part in your fraud. And as for the prison time, that is between you and the judge. I am done managing your logistics." I turned to Daniel. "We are done here." "Lauren," my father called out as I walked toward the door. "You can't just walk away." I stopped with my hand on the handle. I looked back at them one last time. Two people trapped in a prison of their own expectations, terrified of a world where they actually had to pay for things. "I am not walking away, Dad," I said. "I am being discharged. My service to this family is over." I walked out. I didn't look back. That evening, in my apartment, the one I paid for, the one Valerie hated, I took the box of evidence down from the wall. I took down the timeline with the red circles. I took down the scanned forgery. I took down the printouts of the emails where they called me crazy. I put them all into a white cardboard banker's box. I didn't burn them. That would be dramatic. I just put the lid on. I took a black marker and wrote one word on the side: control. I put the box on the highest shelf of my closet, behind my winter coats. I didn't need to look at it every day anymore. I didn't need to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. The world knew. The courts knew. The box was just paper now. It had no power over me. A notification chimed on my laptop. It was an email from Daniel. Subject: Final order. Attached is the court order dissolving the Keaton Legacy Initiative and formally exonerating you from any liability. The judge also signed the restraining order. They cannot contact you again. It is over. Lauren, you are free. I closed the laptop. I walked out onto my small balcony. The sun was setting over Portland, turning the river into a ribbon of gold. I could see the Hayes Harbor Convention Hall in the distance, a tiny speck in the skyline. I thought about revenge. For years, I thought revenge meant making them hurt the way I hurt. I thought it meant screaming. I thought it meant burning their world down. But looking at the city, feeling the cool air on my face, I realized I was wrong. Revenge wasn't about them. It wasn't about seeing Valerie in a jumpsuit or seeing my father cry. That was just justice. Revenge was this. It was the quiet. It was the fact that I could pay my rent. It was the fact that my signature belonged to me. It was the fact that I could wake up in the morning and not be afraid of a phone call. Revenge was living a life that they couldn't touch, couldn't edit, and couldn't steal. I met Maya and Daniel for dinner that night at a small bistro. We didn't talk about the case. We talked about Maya's new show. We talked about Daniel's daughter getting into college. When the check came, I reached for it. "I got it," Daniel said. "Pro bono perk." "No," I said, putting my card down. "I want to pay. It is my money, and I know exactly where it came from." Maya raised her glass of wine. "To the truth," she said. "To logistics," Daniel added, clinking his glass against hers. I raised my water glass. I looked at them. My strange, unexpected platoon. "To the law," I said, a smile finally breaking through the reserve I had held for so long. It turns out, the most effective way to destroy your enemies is just to force them to live in a world that has rules. We laughed. It was a real laugh, deep and unburdened. I went home alone. I unlocked my door. I turned on the kettle. I made a cup of tea. I sat in my chair by the window and watched the city lights. My phone was silent. There were no frantic texts demanding my signature. There were no guilt trips. There was just the steam rising from my cup and the steady beat of my own heart. The gala was over. The applause had faded. The $50 million was safe. But the real prize wasn't the money. It was the silence in the room. It was the feeling of sitting in a chair that I owned, in a life that I built, knowing that for the first time in 20 years, the name Lauren Keaton belonged entirely to me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment down below sharing your location and your thoughts on Lauren's revenge. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so we can get these stories out to more people who need to hear them.